Revolution. That's when, America was at its most prosperous, when government was at its smallest. Now, government is consuming 43% of GDP, and it's rising rapidly. Meanwhile, our GDP is all fluff. I mean, it's all services. It's legal. It's medical. It's education. Back then, it was manufacturing. It was mining. It was real. We were actually making things. Now, all the things that we consume, we're importing them from abroad. We're running enormous trade deficits. We're the world's biggest debtor nation right now with all this government. We used to be the world's biggest creditor. We used to be the low-cost manufacturer. We manufactured the lowest-cost goods, even though we paid the highest wages, because we had a tiny government and we had a lot of savings. We had a lot of capital, so the economy could grow. We don't do that anymore. Our savings rate is negative. Nobody is saving because the government has punished people for saving. Interest rates are at zero. Who's going to save money when interest rates are zero? They've turned everybody into a speculator. Everybody's trying to make a return by gambling. But nobody is actually doing the savings that we need to grow a real economy. If you want to know why all the manufacturing jobs have disappeared, because we don't have the capital. And all the regulations on top of the lack of capital have rendered our industries uncompetitive. We've been living in this fantasy economy that we think, well, we can go without manufacturing because we can borrow money from China or borrow money from Japan so that we can import all the things that we don't produce, and we can have this service sector economy. But that's a farce. That's the same fairy tale that we believed in when we thought real estate prices would always rise, or the same fairy tale when we thought stock prices would always rise. But anyway, I want to wrap it up so I can get to your questions. So I want to go to Washington and actually bring some sanity to government. And I don't think any of these problems that we have right now are going to be solved by the people that are there, by the politicians that are there, because their only concern is their re-election. And there is no way to solve these problems if you're concerned about getting re-elected, because what's popular is not what's right. I learned that, in business. It was popular to sell internet stocks in 1999, but it wasn't right. Right? It was popular to convince people to overpay for houses a couple of years ago using, no-doc, interest-only liar's loans, but it wasn't the right thing to do. The things that we need to do right now as a nation are not going to be popular with a lot of voters, particularly voters who are getting checks from the federal government. But we have to do the right thing. The price that we're going to pay as a nation, if we continue on this path, if we let politicians put their own careers ahead of the national interest, is we are going to destroy our currency, we're going to have runaway inflation, prices are going to go through the roof, interest rates are going to go through the roof, we'll have twice as many people unemployed as we have now. It's going to be a real disaster. And, I'm willing to go there and do whatever I can to turn this around, to try to win over the other senators one at a time, to do whatever it takes, get them to understand what needs to be done, and give them the courage to do the right thing, and understand why it's so important and so vital that they do that. And I know a lot of times, people who have run in the Republican Party, they talk about shrinking government, but they never do anything about it. I mean, the minute they get to government, they're a part of it, and they want to stay there. They might be Republicans to get elected, but in their hearts, they're politicians, and they want to stay in office. They want to be in Washington. I don't want to be there, right? And I don't care if I'm reelected. I'm not even going to try to get reelected. One 6-year term is really all I want. And I don't know that if I can't do what needs to be done in 6 years, then it can't be done. Because we can't do this for 6 more years. We can't keep borrowing money for 6 years. People try to say that we're putting these debts on our grandkids. Our grandkids aren't going to pay these debts. We're going to pay these debts. This house of cards is going to come tumbling down now. The money that we're borrowing, we're not borrowing money with 30-year government bonds. We're issuing treasury bills. The average maturity on the national debt is 3 years. A third of the debt comes due in the next year. And if the Chinese and the Japanese don't want to roll it over, we got to deal with it, and we got to deal with it right now. A lot of individual Americans got in trouble because they took out a adjustable rate mortgage. Why did they do that? Because if you took out an adjustable rate mortgage, you got a teaser rate for a few years. You got to make payments that were artificially low, and you weren't concerned about the higher payments that were going to come in when those rates expired. The federal government's done the exact same thing. We've got the national debt financed with a teaser rate. Well, what happens when interest rates go up? And what happens if rates go to 10 or 15%? And what happens when interest on the national debt consumes 100% of tax revenues? Because that could be there in a couple of years. So we've got to deal with these problems, and we've got to deal with them right now. And I'm the only one that is going to do it. I'm the only one that is running for this office to solve these problems, not to perpetuate his own career, or not because he wants to be in Washington. I'd rather stay in Connecticut. But I understand that the people that we have elected are never going to do this. And so I am not going to go to Washington and abandon my principles. I'm going to Washington to bring these principles to Washington and make sure that everybody else adopts them. Anyway, let me thank you for having me, and I want to open up and answer any questions you have on any issue.
What is your take on our present income tax system? Are you in favor of a flat tax, a national sales tax, or some other change?
Well, ideally, I'd like to have a flat tax of 0, which is pretty flat. I think that an income tax is a very inefficient way for the government to raise revenue. I think it is inconsistent with liberty and freedom, and I think in many ways it's being collected unconstitutionally. So I don't like the income tax. I think that at a minimum, I would like to see a flat rate if we're going to have it at all. And I like everybody to pay the same rate. No matter how much you earn, it's the same rate of tax. So if you earn $1 million and that rate is 15%, then you pay 15%. If you earn $50,000, you pay 15%. That way, everybody has the same rate. And if you're going to raise taxes on one person, you raise taxes on every person. That way, you can't have politicians promising something and saying that someone else is going to pay for it. You can't have President Obama saying, we're only going to raise taxes on the rich. No, let's raise taxes on everybody proportionately, because if everybody's going to feel the pain of higher taxes, then everybody is going to oppose them. And still, the rich people are going to pay more, because if they have 10 times the income, they're going to pay 10 times the tax. But I don't want people voting taxes on other people. But I think that if we're going to raise revenue, the most efficient way to do it is through a consumption tax. If people earn a lot of money but don't spend it, they're benefactors. I mean, if somebody earns $10 million a year but is living on $50,000 a year, and they're taking the rest of that money and they're just investing it, they're putting it in the bank, or they're starting businesses, they are helping the economy. They're providing production, they're providing employment opportunities, they're growing the economy. Why do you want to tax people on what they put into the economy? Tax them on what they take out. That's when they spend. So if the guy wants to buy a yacht or he wants to buy a fancy car, then tax him. But don't tax work. We want more work. We don't want to punish that. We want to reward that. The most efficient way to tax is a consumption, tax spending. And of course, the problem with the income tax is it costs a fortune to enforce it, to collect it. We've got armies of lawyers and accountants that we don't really need. They're all there because of taxes. Estate planning is there because of taxes. We're all a bunch of pack rats. Everybody has to keep books and records. I mean, why? Why do we have to account for everything we do? And when you fill out an income tax return, it's like you're filling out a confession. You're telling the government everything about yourself. Why does the government have to get all this information about us? When you pay a sales tax, or they don't know anything about you. So I would like to reform the tax code. But the first thing we got to do is stop the country from going completely broke. But once we do that, yes, if we can reform the tax code and move more towards a consumption-based tax system, everybody will benefit because we'll have a much more vibrant economy. Yes.
I have a question about one of the things you mentioned in your handout was end runaway entitlements. And you also talked earlier about spending and getting a handle on spending or cutting spending. From everything that I've read and seen, the fact is that between the interest on the debt and the entitlements that are already there, namely Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, those have been kind of like fixed expenses, and there's very little things you can cut. I don't think it's so much cutting spending, it's somebody's got to rework the entitlements so that they don't cost near as much.
Well, exactly. I mean, the entitlements aren't fixed, unfortunately. They're growing dramatically.
Right.
And we have to put a stop to it. We have to understand that the popular programs, Medicare and Social Security, don't work, right? Bernie Madoff is in jail right now because he ran a Ponzi scheme. Right? Ponzi schemes are illegal because they don't work.
Ponzi scheme going.
Exactly. So we have to acknowledge that these programs are popular because they don't work. I mean, everybody loved Bernie Madoff right up until the time where he confessed it was a Ponzi scheme.
Right.
Well, we are at that point right now with Social Security. Social Security this year is going to pay out more in benefits than it collects in taxes. So we're already at the point where Bernie Madoff had to turn himself in. Now, the unfunded liabilities are over $10 trillion. So Social Security has been broke for a long time on an actuarial basis. But on a cash basis, it was still okay. Now it's not. And that's how all Ponzi schemes are. They work for a while until they collapse. And that's where we are with Social Security. And so we've got to do something. We've got to address the issue. See, politicians are afraid to talk about these